Welcome to the Conversion Disorder Podcast. I'm Rob.
And I'm Scott. This is all about the hidden costs of acquisition marketing. Today, our topic is we're going to talk about lead gen for the next couple of episodes, but in particular, today we're going to talk about demographics.
Demographics are, let's just say, normally gone into in a very traditional way, but it can also go a very non-traditional way very fast. A lot of people use a lot of different terminology. A lot of people might put different details or levels of detail within it. So we kind of wanted to level set and give an idea about, when people talk about it, what are they really meaning? What are they really trying to get to? But also, how does it help you? Like, what does it actually do when you're trying to set things up?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of demographics is actually set by the folks who sell that data or make that data available, right? The data pen companies. And they acquire that information in all kinds of ways. They might partner with e-commerce folks in order to get some, basics and say that if you bought this thing, right, you must therefore be, right? They will also work with bulk package shipping companies. There's all sorts of ways to like extract that data, public records, right? And when they pull it together, as you can imagine, that is not always perfect data, right? That's why some of the demographic data targeting, et cetera, goes a little bit awry. And the other thing is that not all the data points are valuable, right? So I might be, let's say, a 45-year-old man, and all of a sudden I'm looking into senior homes. Is it because I'm a senior citizen? No, it's because I'm related to one, and I care about them, and I'm looking at, helping them find a place. But that situation might tag me incorrectly. So demographics is about the person, but oftentimes when we're marketing, remember that you're on a device, right, which might actually represent a household as opposed to a single individual.
There's a lot of different ways that people can be defined that are beyond, let's call it traditional targeting means, right? Like even back and it's still used now, but like the affinity groups, for example. So when you use like the affinities on Facebook, you can say, I'll use an example most people know. I need household income over X, or I need at least one child in the home over Y, age, or whatever it's going to be. And that's one level of targeting. But if you go more broad, you could just say, I want, females from 25 to 50 years old in these states that make this much, because that's our core demographic. Like that is our core. These are our perfect, ideal customers. That we know of right now, because that's always going to change at some point. But the main part is you need to figure out, it's not just always intent, because intent, your demographics and where you are in life can change the intent of certain events. It can also work the other way. So it's always part about timing, but there are some requirements you just can't get around. Like the age requirement of like renting a car, or like, stuff like that, or something that's just not worth getting around. So what is the point of targeting that if you literally cannot service those people? It's just going to be, quote unquote, wasted ad spend, right? Or is it? Or is it maybe someone looking up stuff for their grandfather or their grandmother or something else, like Scott said?
Yeah. So, and that's why we always advocate having an ability, right, to make money off of your declines and other things like that in order to give you that cushion in case you do a demographic buy-in. Maybe it didn't go the way you thought it would, right? But that's a topic for another thing. But let's talk about maybe the most valuable data points, right, in terms of demographics as a general rule. So I'll start with age, right? Once upon a time, short story, we had a huge email list, and we parsed out the front part of the email, and about 60% of them, you could get a piece of a name, right? And what we figured out was that we did this the roundabout way, but what we ultimately figured out was that the names have a correlation to the time that they were born because of the popularity of name frequencies during different times. And so using that, we had a rough approximation, right, of about 2/3 of our list and what their rough age group was. And so that was actually a pretty good way to get us to that age data point as opposed to buying it, right? Because it was self-identified, which actually has a different value than if you buy it from mysterious faceless vendor, right, who just wants to sell you all the data. But nonetheless, age proved to be one of the best targeting pieces for multiple types of big ticket lead gen. So that was my experience there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another one I would probably say for me, and this is a lot harder now, especially with industries and with depending on how the laws are changing for targeting and all of that. But gender is still very, very good to target on in general. And I say that because of the obvious reasons, right? Like, if you're trying to push testosterone or something, it's like, well, the majority of the time, maybe not 100%, but the majority of the time, it's going to go in a very specific type of place, or it's going to react to a very specific type of person. But at the same time, for example, when you have these kind of set up and you know exactly what your core demo is, that might not be the person who's trying to find the product that they're trying to buy. So there's a difference between head of household and who does the purchasing for a household for certain types of products, or in general, whatever it is. And half the people listening are probably like, oh, I could see that. The other half are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it's very interesting to see, for example, when you start to get into industries where people are supposed to disclose that they are not the person they're filling out the application for. There's someone else, like a helper or assistant or whatever it is. It is amazing to watch the gender difference between those two. And that's the person that just guided them to you. So if they're not the ones that are actually looking for it or whatever it is, I mean, this is obviously a small example, but that ripples out to so many other things. So obviously with that, gender is a big one as well. If you can, and I say this, please check with your attorneys and the laws, because especially with stuff like rentals or housing, like there are restrictions about targeting, even on the advertising.
Yeah. And then I would say there's a whole bunch of data points that maybe individually are not super indicative, but together tell you something about the general relative financial level of the person, right? A lot of folks go for a credit score, but it's very easy to not know or to misrepresent, right? But if you look at home ownership, car ownership, marital status, their interests, right? They'll be interested in certain products that correlate to their particular financial strata, right? These kinds of things, ultimately, the financial data is extremely valuable, as everybody will tell you, right? But the way that you get there, possibly consider not just having the single data point, especially if your tests with a single data point do not prove out, right? Or it might be time to look at a different data vendor. That is yet another topic, right?
Yeah, there's a lot where there's a very fine line between your data being bad and like your targeting being bad. And that's why it's always important that it doesn't matter who I work with. It always starts with, do you know what your core demographic is? And then the second question is would they agree with you? And it's hilarious to watch the face as question 2 hits and they go, whoa, hold on. But I know who the best one is. I'm like, but they're the ones signing the check. They're the ones making the decision. So you gotta think about that. And so a good example that I usually reference is insurance. So whenever I'm talking to insurance agents or brokers or whatever it might be, the majority of people I talk to that know like auto, or they're talking to auto, if it is a person that, for example, marital status is single, the majority of the time, like they'll tell me demographic wise, it's not really going to be a difference on their intake. But is that just their lead qualities that they're targeting? I don't know. But what I do know is that I have another one that like 80% of their intake is female, because they specialize in family policies in a very specific place. So their sales agents that perform better on those types of inbound leads take those inbound leads. And like, that's not even on the marketing side, that's the sales side. But what happens if your marketing doesn't correlate to your sales? So it's always good to know what you're going after, and more importantly, how you're going after them, because it has to be the same message.
Right, absolutely. And then one more way to look at this, right, is that if you're a lead generator, you have a complicated form process where they go through and give you information in order to try to buy your product or look at quotes for a product, right? Great, because you have direct signals, right? All the demographic data that you buy in the world is not typically going to outperform the signals that you get from the person directly. On the other hand, if you're a publisher, if you're a media buyer, right? If you're somebody who has access to lots of traffic, but you don't necessarily specialize in interacting with that traffic, in terms of anything other than sending ads, for example, or putting them in front of other people's offers. Oftentimes, it might be helpful to layer that demographic data, but treat it with some suspicion, right? If you are, say, an emailer, then perhaps the better thing to do is to put different language into different sends and try to see the reaction level of that language from each of your different lists, right? Because we all know emailers have sources of data and it's not always the same, right? And think of those as the different campaigns or the different ads or even the different survey questions. That's your equivalent. So if you can get them to react to language that is talking strongly about their financial future and et cetera, then perhaps that's a finance signal. If you can get them to react strongly to, for example, language about senior citizens and retirement and planning and so on, it means either that they are a senior citizen or at least they have one in their household that they are thinking about, right? So either way, you end up with a direct signal. So active signal, I think, generally speaking, is still ultimately much better than demographics. Google didn't make their giant fortune from looking at data buys, right? They ultimately got it from the direct signal of people typing in the search intent because the active signal far outweighs. So try to remember that.
Yep. And also one more small example of that too is while that is it's a very accurate example too. The one thing that we did go over is by the time we actually are at that point, it means we already knew who to target and then also how, right? So just to point this out, this is not a you have to do it from scratch thing. If you already have data, you're actually in a better position. Go back to what, but keep in mind, you advertise a certain way, so it may lean a certain way. But at least when you look at that, you might go, oh, that's weird. We didn't actually target these, but it was like 6% of our leads, and they actually performed above average. Maybe we should try expanding our demos a little bit, or maybe we should try putting some money into that one. So it's really about what's going to work for you. But also I'll leave this last little tip here too, is if you're going to work with other people's signals, ask them what the criteria is for how it's generated. Because if some of them are like, oh, it's an email open. Really? From who? To who? About what? In what? And a lot of them will say on topic or like on the category. It's like, what category? What keywords are in that category? So it's all, you need to be able to understand what you're being given, which means you need to also be able to understand what you're targeting. And this is all the same conversation, but just giving that as you can always trust as far as you can throw them, right? The actual information they give you. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't perform, it doesn't perform, but you need to know why.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, not to say that email open is not valuable. I don't want any angry notice. But if you can track opens correctly, and then if you are just getting the subject line as opposed to the contents, which is not what the email open's about. Anyway, all right, cool. So this week we're trying out a new segment called AI Did What? And Rob, take it away.
So this one's going to be a little light because we're still refining, but I do have one thing that'll be kind of interesting on a more meta level. So one of the bigger things that I've been watching is obviously as we've been going against and fixing up the competition of who's going to be the best AI and who's going to be the best AI for this. Amazon finally is getting into it to the point where they had their little coding platform and all that good stuff. But now they have the Agentic AI Creative Studio. And that I think is their bridge of like the concept of the ease of Google AI Studio, but with Amazon's dedicated infrastructure for all of the corporate style stuff. They're going towards we know you enjoy complexity, but we know that you don't know how to explain it. So here is simplicity for your complexity. I cannot wait to see how that concept works because I love it conceptually, but we'll see how that goes. For next week on, though, everything is going to actually be scoped to marketing. I just didn't have any really good examples this week of that one, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, I can't believe that the people who created Amazon's permission management system is going to claim that they're going to simplify, well, stuff. So
to be fair, the simplification claim may be by my AI simplifying the summary of the simplified article. But yes, overall, the direction that people are going is very interesting with that, especially on Google's launch of the new Pixel line, because they leaned into the AI so hard, as I can tell you. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. But unlike this time, we will try to keep this segment brief in the future, which means I will pre-write this.
All right. Well, that's it for us this week. And thank you very much. And I was told to say like and subscribe. So do that thing.
Bell, if there is one, ring it. The thing.